Welcome to the Talking Toughness series of podcasts, where we examine the mental toughness concept with guests from a wide range of sectors, illustrating that our mental approach to what happens to us and around us matters for all of us. Our guests come from the worlds of business and public service, education, social mobility, sport, and health. They all share their experiences and their observations about the factors that have enabled them to survive and to thrive on their journey through life. Many guests have gone further and incorporated the concept into what they do as coaches, trainers, managers, and leaders, helping others to thrive in their turn. Their experiences are valuable to those of us who strive to do the same. Good morning, John. How are things on the west coast of Ireland today?
Things on the west coast of Ireland are great, thanks, Doug. Yeah, pretty good. Just trudging through things in the day job, marking essays and case studies and that kind of thing. But you packing for a holiday, I believe?
I am. We do get holidays occasionally, so I'm really looking forward to it. I'm going onto the East Coast, very close to our mutual friend, Professor Clough, so I might even bump into him.
Maybe, yeah. So talking about England, I think we're heading back to England today, aren't we, for this podcast?
We are, and we've got a really great guest today. We've got Joanne Taylor. Just checking, Joanne and I have known each other since 2009, so that's quite some time. And from almost all of that time, she's been somebody that has been working with the mental toughness concept. Joanne is a coach and a trainer, which is currently a people and performance consultant with ARK Consultancy, and we'll explore ARK Consultancy a little later. But since she joined ARK Consultancy, she's been instrumental in taking the concept into a comparatively new area, the area of social mobility. I mean, we tend to do most of our work in sports, business, and so on. But there are people who are using the concept in the area of social mobility, that is working with people who are disadvantaged in some way, usually economically, socially, and there are other reasons. But it's important to help them to understand how they can prosper despite their current circumstances. So it's great to have Jo with us today. Welcome, Jo. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. And thank you for inviting me along today. Looking forward to speaking to you both.
Great. I think we can start perhaps. I've mentioned ARK Consultancy, and we're going to be talking about the things that you've been doing with the mental toughness concept and the questionnaire, which I think a lot of people are going to be very interested in. And in recent times, a lot of that has been to do with the work that ARK Consultancy does. So perhaps you can just tell us for a moment what it is that ARK Consultancy does.
Yeah, so ARK are typically a housing consultancy working in the public sector. So we're 35 years old, and as you mentioned before, I very much work in the people side of the business. So we work with housing associations, local authorities, but in my side of the business, we also work with charities, which is where the social mobility stuff comes in. We measure social return on investment for those charities who are really trying to get funding, which is so difficult right now, and help them evidence their projects really making a difference, sustainable difference. And we build in the MTQ, as you mentioned.
Brilliant. So I know that you are just coming to the end of a remarkable project that's in the Black Country. For those outside of the UK, that's right in the middle of the UK. And it's working with young offenders. It'd be helpful if you told us a little bit about the project, about what the hoped for outcomes were, why you integrated mental toughness into it, and an indication of the kind of results that have been achieved, because they are spectacular.
Okay, so Black Country was part of a talent match project. So initially there was 21 projects that were commissioned from a big lottery, and there were 21 community projects across the UK that were commissioned, and the project's been running now for 8 years. We got started right at the beginning, and their initial project was to look at those that are furthest from the labour market, those that have been in care, offending background, had troubles with alcohol and drug dependency. So those that were likely to be forgotten, and actually that became Black Country's strapline of nobody left behind. When we initially put in our bid, if you like, to support the project with regards to measuring their social return on investment, we also looked at how they worked with the people on programme, their participants, the mentees, and we built in mental toughness there. One of the things they talked about was building people's confidence, and that was kind of the hook for me. They wanted to evidence that they could 100% increase everybody's confidence that they touched within the programme. That's a really big ask. And it was, so how can you prove it? So that for me was a bit of an opener in the tender to say, well, I've got something we could use that we could evidence that you did that. So that's kind of was our opener to the mental toughness, I guess. And the team at Black Country really enjoyed the concept. They got it, they understood around the levels of mental toughness, that bounce back, resilience, everything that their participants would really need to flourish in a new world, really, because they had been, we're looking third, fourth generation of worklessness. We are looking at families that have dad may be in prison, uncle's in prison. So it's culturally part of the way that they were, and they knew they had some really big barriers to overcome. So what the mental toughness gave them was not only this impact measure, which is something that was really, really important to show that did we really increase everybody's confidence. However, it also gave the mentors a way to really work with the mentees, to work with them on a one-to-one level. Once the project had been, so 5 years, the project was commissioned. What they found out is that they were really, really successful with those that had an offending background. So when they reached their end of their funding, they managed to get another 3 years just as a target those offenders, because what they realised is that they had a really, really great impact by using the mental toughness scores. They were able to work with them on a one-to-one basis. They did a lot more hand-holding. They broke down lots of preconceptions. So the idea that if you've been in prison, you must be mentally tough because you've been through the system, that's complete fallacy. These young guys were coming out of prison with, the things that they went in with no home, no community, their network. They really did need that wraparound support. So it's really enabled them to move forwards. And the results were brilliant. But what we knew was that people that were coming into project, when we assessed them to begin with, their mental toughness scores as an average was a 3.7, which we knew was significantly lower than what would be expected to, I guess as you would call an average result for an adult, being around 5.2. We knew that they were more sensitive in those areas, and you could see from their backgrounds, I guess, why that might be. But how their behaviours, how they would respond, that's what the mental toughness allowed the mentors to really understand. So somebody that was low on confidence, what wraparound support would they need to give them? So our mentors were picking them up outside the gates. They were taking them to their housing meetings. They created this relationship, and that's why that one-to-one support with this cohort was so important. Especially, we also did it through COVID. So that was the other thing. Everybody was so removed. And I think we really underestimate the power of connection. So having that mentor that really understood that participant was a massive help for them.
That's fantastic. At the end of the podcast, we will ask you for contact details. So anybody who wants to look at the data will be able to get in touch with you directly. What I'm interested in is you've used this very successfully with a group of people, and I'm very often told, oh, you'll never get young offenders, you'll never get people like that to complete a questionnaire. But you seem to have gotten to complete the questionnaire and get something from it. How did that happen?
I guess they believed in the process to start from. It was because the way that we built the programme, it was a part of us helping them. So the way that it was introduced, the way that the package was delivered to them, it wasn't an add-on. This was how we can really work with you on a one-to-one level. It's helping us know you, and it's helping you know you in lots of ways, raising those levels of awareness. And our mentees don't just complete the MTQ once, they do it 3 times, because they are mentored for a period of 12 months. So we do a starter and we do a middle and we do an end result for those participants that complete their 12-month journey. And not everybody does, because very often once they've had that first meet, they've got somebody that really works with them on an individual level, they flourish and they've gone into work, volunteering or education. So for us, we didn't really have a problem getting people to complete it, because that was the contract, I guess, if you like, the verbal contract. We said, this is how we're going to work with you, and it was sold in straight away, and they were really receptive in that process.
Well, I'm relieved to hear that. I think you're absolutely right. If you explain a psychometric measure properly to a person, they will embrace it. If you just say, here is something you're going to complete, very often you get a rejection. So it sounds like that was the right approach with a potentially difficult audience.
Yeah, no, it absolutely was. And all of our mentors were on board as well. That was the other thing. So the whole team within Black Country absolutely buy into the concept of mental toughness. Their work coaches understood the concept. They knew how that would really help them work with the participants. The job coaches knew, the mentors knew, the project knew. So everybody was brought on board with the value that the measure gave them, the insights that it gave them. And as you said, for the participants, just having that explained, it wasn't just, you need to fill in this piece of paper, you just need to fill in that. It was the so what. What this means is we're going to be able to really work with you on a one-to-one basis. For me, one of the things that I love about mental toughness is it stops some of that sheep dip training that you might get. Everybody needs confidence. Well, no, not everybody does. Some people don't need that. They need something completely different. In fact, lots of people need something different. So it allowed them, and I think for the offenders especially, for them to feel that they were being dealt with as an individual. When you've been in that, institutionalized in that way, you kind of lose your identity, the who you are, the kind of things that make you tick, your values, your beliefs, and actually they were able to work with them on a one-to-one basis that I think made them feel for the first time valued.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, really. And certainly what we try and do with the mental toughness reports is, because it does include a lot of detail, it includes a lot of different kind of subcomponents to it. It does individualize things a little bit more. How many different combinations are there again, Doug? 40,000 or something?
Just over 40,000, yes.
Yeah, so if it were a simple confidence scale, you're 1 to 10 on this, and you're just like loads of other people. So hopefully it allows them to get that. But one thing you said earlier, Joe, that I thought was really interesting was about they were almost surprised to have scored lower because of this fallacy of thinking going through tough times makes you tough. Like probably the worst phrase, very popular, is that idea of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, like, which is nonsense. Trauma does not make you stronger. Support makes you stronger. How did you then be able to set about, from the coaching point of view, developing mental toughness and the aspects of it with that in mind, that, you know, these people have been through difficult times and what they actually need is support and security? So
one of the brilliant things about the project and the way that it was set up was there were community hubs. So we operated out of 5 community hubs. So there was always going to be a safe space. One of the things when this project was first commissioned was we identified that the things that perhaps I used to know as being a child, those community hubs that you'd go to, the youth clubs, there aren't places to go. So it was really important that we had hubs where mentees on programme had somewhere to go to meet like-minded people. The other thing was that one-to-one mentoring. So I trained all the mentors so that they were all familiar with the mental toughness, they were all familiar with different tools and techniques, and we very much focused on solution-focused mentoring. So we looked at all the strengths that a person brought rather than the problems that lots of people had seen. And so that one-to-one support, as you said, where it is very much that wraparound, they had that from the mentor. What the mental toughness gave them is they gave them ways to work with that person, and it gave them a really quick way to build rapport, because we had 12 months to work with somebody, which feels like a really long time. But when you're talking with significant trauma, when you're talking about somebody that has been in prison for a period of time, 12 months is nothing. They haven't even got a home to start with, and don't let me start talking about the housing shortage. That's the first thing these guys have to do. So while 12 months might feel like a long time in our world of L&D or OD, to support somebody when they've gone through multiple challenges of what is deemed by perhaps society as multiple, they have multiple complex needs. 12 months is not a long time to really support somebody to get them to feel settled. If we look at that kind of that fundamentals, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, these guys don't have any of that to start with. So that one-to-one support was really crucial. And that's how we got, I guess, everything to work and everything to click together, if that answers the question, John.
Yeah, it does. Do you work kind of with other bodies in terms of like an advocacy thing now? Because I can sense that you're on the verge of going on to a rant about property, and understandably so. But I know when a young offender comes out of any kind of setting, they kind of need that advocacy, right? They don't have a place to go. They don't necessarily have the money, and not just a crossroads, but a spaghetti junction, really. So to what extent does the coaching sort of have the individual coaching, but also an advocacy kind of role, linking them in with other areas?
I guess that's what made us a unique partner for Black Country, because our speciality are relationships with housing. So what we were able to do is help them to put together partnerships, co-working. We introduced them to other providers in the area. They also looked at commissioning. So they've got something that's called a preferred supplier network. So there were special services. So counselling, mentees could get counselling from the service. They could be linked directly in. If somebody needed basic maths English, they could get that. If somebody needed basic fundamental things like a washing machine or emergency accommodation, they had a network of support. The project was really well commissioned to look at what are going to be some of the barriers the participants on programme are going to have, and what might we need to have in place. So yes, they were able to be advocates for them. They were able to have those warm contacts of, actually, this is an emergency accommodation, so you can come out and we can help you. They also got really great at understanding the world of benefits and helping them apply for universal credit and things like that, just to start them off. Food banks, there were links with local YMCA charities. So there was a great network of support, and that's what makes this project, I think, really unique, is that partnership working, is that there's so many funded projects that work insular, they work independently, and actually you can't be one thing to all people.
Yeah, you kind of get those foundations in place, and like you say, you're thinking of a hierarchy of needs there, I suppose. That makes an awful lot of sense.
Joe, I've watched the project through your eyes. I know that there's a report about to be published, and I know that the report is talking about the successes at the project level, but I also know that you are actually mapping every single individual journey through the project, which is something that's kind of reinforcing the idea that this is effective not only at a group level, but it's actually effective at an individual level. Can you tell us something about some of the highlights, some of the big outcomes for the project and for some of the individuals, perhaps?
I guess if we're looking at it from a data level, what we know is that from an MTQ basis, participants significantly have increased their mental toughness scores throughout the programme. We actually know that some of those that we are most successful with are those that have got an offending background, and equally those that have left care, which again was really interesting from some of the data. Those were the ones that perhaps came into the project more sensitive, and those that they seem to have, I guess, a bigger growth, which was quite interesting. the success, I guess, from an individual level is that participants have got fantastic results. We measure the social return on investment of the project. As I mentioned, we're able to evidence a social return on investment of this project to around £45,000 per person on programme, which is significant when you think about the numbers of people that we work with. But yeah, we get a lot of growth. Challenge and confidence are one of those ones that we've been really successful with, and confidence specifically, I think, it's the one that's really kind of forgotten but makes the most difference, especially with this cohort, because confidence can be confidence to leave the house, confidence to get on the bus. You're trying to get people into work. If you don't work on those things, how can they get to work if they've never left their home? Some of the participants were in that situation on programme. So really being able to help them. And by measuring the mental toughness intermittently, what we were able to do is also show the participant their growth, because sometimes you don't realise how far you've come. So they don't realise that they came in ones and twos, which we know from the data says that is an extreme sensitivity, and now they're 4s and 5s, and they don't realise the impact that has on them. Not only when we're saying, we can see that's really different, you look at the fact that you're now running a project, you're running a group within the hub, you might be running a movie night or a hobby night or a book club, or you've now started making friends on projects. So you can but it gives them something to see. Well, you were here and you are now here. That's huge. And the reports then tell them that it's different. The wording in the reports is different. So it really does enhance their growth, I think, and that's really useful. So there's been massive, massive achievements throughout the project. They've been able to get people not only into work, but sustainable work. And I think that's a real key one for me. Lots of people can tick got them into jobs, but this is sustainable work. It's work with purpose. It's really understanding the employability. The other thing that Black Country do brilliantly is work with employers. So we broke down the barriers of employing a young offender, for example. So things that they need to know and things they don't need to know, we kind of demystified some of those things. We enabled them to meet them first and kind of do some mock interviews. So equally, the participants knew what to expect on going to interview days. So trying to make that process as simple as possible. So there's been so many successes within this program, and some really small individual personal things that for me, they may seem, like I say, small, but seeing somebody that didn't make eye contact, somebody that, when you first met them, couldn't be in a room with other people, suddenly then speak in front of 80 people at one of their conferences, telling them how the project's impacted them and the difference it makes. That stuff's really brilliant.
Yeah, what a stark contrast. And I wonder there, Doug wrote a post a while back, like a bit of a blog post about kind of how vulnerability and mental toughness are actually related to each other, and it's an area I'm interested in, because you hear a lot of people talk about vulnerability now, a lot of the sort of Brené Brown stuff, and instinctively I saw vulnerability as being a useful tool towards developing mental toughness, rather than them seeing as contradictory in any way. And that what you're describing to me there, Joe, just sounds like the person who can't leave the house, the person who can't look you in the eye. Is it fair to think that actually getting that person to be aware of those, whether it's vulnerabilities or insecurities, or however you want to phrase it, is that actually one of the first steps towards becoming tougher? And it almost sounds paradoxical that to become tougher, you have to engage really in your sensitivities, your insecurities, your vulnerabilities.
Yeah, absolutely, John. And I think that's where, to try and have that conversation with somebody, that's quite difficult, isn't it? To kind of say, this is what I observe from you. So where the mental toughness reports work really well for the mentors is that they were really able to unpick, so how does this show up for you? What is it that you think that you're doing? So it enabled that conversation, rather than, us having to point out any, and there being any judgment, we were able to really be curious to go, okay, so tell me, how do you behave? How does that show up for you? Okay, so, and is it helping you? Does it work for you or against you? So when we're talking about, maybe sensitivities around confidence, how was that showing up? Well, actually, I can't make friends. Okay, so let's talk about what that looks like. Or I can't leave the house. Okay, so what does that look like? And because this project, like I said, had that one-to-one mentoring relationship, it was like, great, well, the mentor met that person at the door for the first time, and then they would meet them at the bus stop the next time, and then they would get on the bus with them at the next time. So they were able to then develop those things. But what the MTQ gave the mentors was the ability to kind of explore those vulnerabilities in a safe space. So it didn't look like we were making any judgments. It was just kind of like, let's talk about what this is and how it shows up for you and what does it mean for you, and enable them to say, yeah, this is what's going on for me. I don't sleep. I find myself feeling really anxious. Those kind of things would come in conversation. And as you say, dare to be vulnerable, if you like, but without any judgment. And from a mentor's perspective, they were able to facilitate that conversation in a safe space.
Yeah, I love the sense of, especially working with a group who I think it's probably a fair assumption that there wouldn't be tremendous mental health literacy in the group. So being able to engage with them by saying, what does it look like? You're linking a psychometric assessment, essentially of cognition, through to a behavior, and what does it actually look like? And I love that way of then being able to think about it in those terms allows you to be creative in terms of how you're developing it. So it's not just about, oh, well, have you tried thinking positively, and throwing some stuff at them, but understanding, okay, so how does that manifest itself in a behavior? And then that allows you to creatively come up with ideas, like the bus stop, meeting them at the bus stop as opposed to the door, meeting them a little bit further down the road. So I can 100% see how that would be engaging. Was it a conscious decision to sort of go down that route of, let's think about what the behaviors look like to engage them?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I did the training for the mentors, it was very much around helping them use the measures. We really had to think about how we use any assessment tools that we were going to use without judgment. Lots of the participants on the programme have been excluded from school. They had been told things about themselves. They'd been given labels. If they'd come from the prison service, that they kind of had these labels all the time. So it was very much being curious and unpicking around how it shows up for somebody. So that was fundamental in our training of how the mentors were taught how to use the tools and the techniques.
That's brilliant, Jo. You've done something really interesting. You've connected an enabler with an outcome, because you've spoken about what you've done and how you've used it and what kind of results you're getting. And for me, it's just a perfect story. But you're not a one-hit wonder either, because I know you are doing other projects, and sometimes as a consequence of the work that you've done with the Black Country Project. So would you just like briefly to tell us about some of those other projects?
Yeah, I guess, like I said, one of the things I really like about the tool is that it enables us to be really curious, and I think it's really versatile. So I use this in a whole range of my projects. So from team development with an exec team in a housing association, from my coaching practice, right through to working on another project, work on a BBO project where I personally mentor. So I personally have 4 people who have been removed from the labour market for a specific time. I use the mental toughness score with them. So I use the assessment. I do one-to-one coaching with them. And the aim is that they are an ambassador for a programme. And again, so some of those amazing stories where they came in and didn't, that they hadn't ever had a job, suddenly to now speaking at conference or doing a video about their journey. I use it with schools. So very much with the mental toughness. I guess we're really creative with it, and I've learned to be brave with it, which I'm enjoying, and my clients are really open to trying that, because we have to, especially if it's a funded project, we're having to be more creative with how we can evidence impact. If it's not written down, it didn't happen, is my favourite saying to my clients. So what the mental toughness gives is it gives them something that they can tangibly touch. A project I'm currently working on, so I haven't got any data to share with you, but we're working with a school. We're working with a number of schools, and we're taking male students from each of those schools, and again we're measuring their mental toughness 3 times. These are students that are identified as potentially either not going into further education, that may fall through the way, or potentially may end up being expelled. So it's a really interesting way of, again, just using the measure in a different way.
I like the I like the creativity element there, and kind of being brave with interpreting it. But there's at no point are we suggesting that, you know, when people do the training, here's how it's delivered and that's it. You must stick to that. I always feel like sometimes it's easy to see a psychometric assessment and a model as the tool, and I always feel actually the practitioner's the tool, and the model and the psychometrics like an attachment to that tool, really. So you're welcome to kind of mold it and be brave and sort of come up with those creative approaches. I wonder then, Joe, in terms of working with such a variety of people, so you could be working with executives through sort of children being at risk of being expelled from school. To what extent is there a kind of crossover in understanding the mental toughness, and where do you find key differences in how you might focus on various aspects of mental toughness differently with those different groups?
I guess the crossover is, I think, human behaviour, whether it at child form or at adult form, the way that the way our emotions show up are very similar. So whether it's from feeling really anxious to being in a schoolroom to really not wanting to sit at the top table because you don't feel like you deserve your position as a director, I think some of those things are very similar. So yeah, I guess when I talk to clients, whether I'm talking to one of my ambassadors or whether I'm talking to a chief executive, actually the emotions behind some of those things that we unpick from the measures are very, very similar. The way it shows up, the words they use, how it's in their settings will feel very, very different, but actually those things I think are similar. Where I think about the differences, it's around the tools and techniques that you're using. There are things that you can get away with, I guess, some more creativity I can with a younger cohort than if I kind of go in with a group of chief execs and go, this is a great, so I have to think about it in a slightly different way. So the tools and techniques that you perhaps give your clients to develop mental toughness. So I would give a different toolkit if I was working with the ambassadors versus what I would give if I was working with a team of executives that are trying to build more of a cohesive team. That answers the question.
Oh, absolutely.
Joe, this is perhaps a question we should have asked you at the start, but it's a good time now. What attracted you to the concept? How did you come across it, and why did you develop this interest?
So as you said, Doug, it was a very long time ago. By memory, I think I remember attending a CIPD event that you were hosting. We also knew at the time I was working with a colleague who you also knew really well, and that kind of relationship. It's like, but what really intrigued me about the concept was there was no right or wrong. I really liked that. It was kind of this, I've always been really curious around why people do the things they do, or you could have people at the same level, but they would behave very differently, or they'd attend a similar event, but they'd all come away with a different experience. So I guess I've always been kind of curious about people and their behaviour. What I liked about mental toughness, and still it's the thing that I love most, is it doesn't pigeonhole people in the box. So regardless of the score, it's what does that actually mean for them? How's that showing up for them in their life? And does it work for them? I never say to somebody they have to develop their mental toughness. You don't have to do anything. What you want to do is raise the awareness to say, this is how it's showing up for you, and does it work? And I guess as I've been using it more and more, I use it now in so many different ways now, because I've just learned to be more curious with it. And that's kind of how I guess that's how I apply it. But I use it as an enabler, as John was saying. It's, it's very much it enables me to have those conversations. But I really love the fact that it didn't put people in a box. Where some of the other measures felt like they did, you are this. And then sometimes I would see that people in teams wear that and they go, oh, I like that. That's my style, so that's okay. And it's like, no, that behaviour is not okay. So I like the fact that there wasn't a right or wrong, didn't pigeonhole people, and there's the ability to grow if you want to. And if you don't, that's okay.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Jo. We've taken a big chunk of your time, but it's been a fascinating podcast. This is really, really interesting. And I think a lot of people will show a lot of interest in this. If people want to know more or they want to get hold of you, how can they do that?
Yeah, I'm happy for you to share my email address. So yeah, just if they want to drop me an email or find me on LinkedIn, you will find me under, so confusing, Jo Turley. I've just got married, so Doug, you introduced me as Joanne Taylor, which I am. I just haven't got around to changing everything yet. Not to my husband's frustration. But yeah, I'll give my email address. I'm more than happy for people to just drop me a line, and I'm happy to share some of the stuff we've been doing.
So if it's LinkedIn, for the present, it's Joanne Turley, but it could well be Joanne Taylor. Joanne with double N-E.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think from my perspective, although I've known you for such a long time, and we do work quite closely together at times, even today has been a little bit of an eye-opener for me. For me, the three takeaways are getting to understand that you have been connected to this concept for a long, long time, but you have taken that time to learn the concept, to learn to understand the concept, and you've unlocked its potential. You're absolutely right. It's we've tried to create a simple explanation for a very complex idea, and it works at that level. But people shouldn't be fooled by its, the simplicity of the model. It's got loads of value. Then the other thing was, and I think this is a coaching and mentoring lesson, the power of connection. The idea that you can be much more effective by having this really effective one-to-one connection with people. I think that's important, and I wonder whether we might be losing some of that with this virtual world that we live in. I know it's very convenient, but there might well be something that's we might be losing there. And then the final message, which I think is a really big one for John and I, is that it's about dealing with people as individuals. The thing that you've just spoken about, avoiding pigeonholing and labeling people. We can get quite annoyed about that when people try to say, right, you're one of 16 types. Well, it can't be. There are 8 billion people on the planet. They're not divided into 16 types. We are actually individuals, and we don't recognize that. We're not going to make any progress with them. So I've got a lot out of this, apart from the fact that you have demonstrated how you can use it in a really challenging and demanding environment and produce some really spectacular results. And that's what people should be focusing on. How can I reproduce what you've been doing, Jo?
Fantastic. It's been great to be a part of the podcast. So hopefully people will have found it useful.
Great stuff. I know I did.